After discovering the first T-shaped pillar buried at the site, he soon found more of these massive structures.
In the heart of southeastern Turkey, beneath roads, homes and fields long claimed by time, lies the forgotten site of Gürcütepe. For decades, archaeologist Klaus Schmidt devoted his life to uncovering humanity's oldest known temples at Göbekli Tepe. But in his final days, it wasn't Göbekli that haunted him. It was Gürcütepe.
It's an unbelievable good preservation of this enclosure, which had been erected by Stone Age people so long ago and which is still existing.
What he uncovered there was so profound, so unsettling. It threatened to upend everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. Whispers of ancient rituals, buried monoliths, and lost knowledge stir beneath the soil, challenging the very foundations of history. This is more than a story of stones and ruins. It is the final testament of a man desperate to be heard. On the last day of his life, Klaus Schmidt issued a plea that still echoes in the silence he left behind. Before I die, please listen. The deathbed plea. In the fading light of his life, Klaus Schmidt, the man who brought Göbekli Tepe into the world's imagination, reached for words that hit heavier than stone. The hospital room was quiet, except for the ticking of time that he knew was running out. Family and a few close colleagues gathered at his bedside, expecting reminiscence and parting wisdom. Instead, Schmidt's voice, weak but insistent, broke through the hush. Before I die, please listen. It's time to tell everything. These were not the words of a man grasping at legacy or searching for accolades. Schmidt's urgency came from something deeper, the burden of a secret that, if left unspoken, could vanish with him. The truth, he insisted, was not about Göbekli Tepe, the temple that had overturned everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. It was about another place, nearly invisible, that could alter the story of history once again. Gürcütepe. Schmidt's secret began years earlier in the rolling farmlands and narrow streets near Şanlıurfa. While Göbekli Tepe had become an icon, celebrated as humanity's first great temple, Schmidt alone knew that history's focus had become too narrow. People only see what stands tallest, he once told a confidant, but sometimes what matters most is buried low and forgotten. Gürcütepe was such a place. There, beneath the surface, in a place where neighbors walked to markets and children played in alleyways, he had glimpsed the outline of an even deeper story. Unlike Göbekli Tepe, Gürcütepe offered no monumental spectacle to impress visitors. It did not loom on a ridge. It had no soaring T-shaped pillars jutting toward the sky. It disappeared into the landscape, almost erased by time and the everyday lives above it. But for Schmidt, Gürcütepe was the key to a mystery that had haunted him for decades, the true fate of the world that built Göbekli Tepe. His final plea was not a boast, but an offering. He wanted those who followed to look beyond the obvious, to see what he had seen, and to continue the search for answers hidden beneath the most ordinary of places. The man who saw beyond stones. To understand the weight of Schmidt's deathbed confession, one must know the man who made it. Klaus Schmidt, born in Germany, was never content to catalogue the past simply. He sought meaning in patterns and connections that eluded others. In 1994, his sharp eye and relentless curiosity brought him to the barren ridge of Göbekli Tepe, a place overlooked for generations. There, he recognized the tops of carved T-shaped pillars protruding from the earth, older by millennia than anything yet uncovered. His excavation would soon rewrite the story of human civilization, revealing a prehistoric temple complex so advanced and unexpected that it forced scholars to reconsider what humans were capable of before the invention of pottery, writing, or the wheel. But even as Göbekli Tepe rose to international fame, Schmidt's mind wandered elsewhere. Living year after year in Şanlıurfa, he became more than a visitor. He listened to the stories of farmers, shared meals with local families, and walked the countryside in search of clues no satellite image or aerial survey could reveal. His notebooks are filled with sketches of fieldstones, descriptions of subtle mounds, and musings about the rhythm of ancient life. Unlike many of his peers, Schmidt did not see the boundary between ritual and daily existence as a wall, but as a window. He believed that the same people who built monumental sanctuaries also tended hearths, made tools, and raised children nearby. He saw hints in the landscape, a cluster of chipped flints here, a scatter of animal bones there, that pointed to a story beyond temples and gods. Ritual is woven through ordinary life, he said, not set apart from it. It was this willingness to see connections, to ask not just what, but why, that drew Schmidt quietly to Gürcütepe. He saw in its low, sprawling mounds not only an archaeological footnote, but the shadow of a civilization's transformation. While others focused on the grandeur of Göbekli Tepe, Schmidt began to suspect that the real answer to humanity's greatest mystery lay hidden in the one place where no one thought to look, a hidden mound in the shadows. Just 2 miles southeast of Şanlıurfa, on the open and unassuming Harran Plain, lay a cluster of 8 low earthen mounds scattered quietly along the Surin stream. Every day, locals traveled the dusty farm roads that snaked between the fields, passing these modest rises without a second thought. There were no monuments and no dramatic outcrops to mark this spot as anything special. Unlike the proud and enigmatic outline of Göbekli Tepe, which rose in solitude atop its limestone ridge and drew the eye from miles around, Gürcütepe was nearly invisible. It lay concealed in plain sight, its contours softened by centuries of farming, sliced by the paths of modern roads, and encroached upon by the steady advance of Şanlıurfa's growing neighborhoods. From the sky, Gürcütepe appeared as a fading patchwork on the landscape, measuring almost 4,000 by 2,600 feet. Archaeologists, forced by necessity and circumstance to break the site into pieces, labeled the distinct rises Gürcütepe 1 through 8. But in reality, most of these features were already lost, built over by houses, factories, or erased by decades of agriculture. Only a few small pockets escaped modernization, the edges of history refusing to be buried entirely. These fragments were more than relics. They were stubborn witnesses to a forgotten age, lingering at the margins of the modern world. To a casual visitor, there was nothing about Gürcütepe to set it apart. It seemed entirely ordinary, just another interruption in the flat green of the plain. But to Klaus Schmidt, it was precisely this ordinariness that made it extraordinary. He would refer to it in his private notes simply as the other site. From the beginning, Schmidt sensed that its humility hid a deeper truth, a secret that had survived because it was hidden, and because nobody had thought to look closely. He knew, with the certainty of someone who has seen patterns others miss, that Gürcütepe's secrets might hold the key to rewriting everything archaeologists thought they knew about the birth of civilization. Digging in silence. In 1995, the year before his team would break ground at Göbekli Tepe and change the world, Schmidt opened his first quiet trenches at Gürcütepe. There was no fanfare, no press, and no rush of international visitors. The digging was careful and deliberate, overshadowed in every way by what would soon become one of archaeology's most celebrated discoveries. However, Schmidt never let the spotlight distract him. Even as the world's gaze shifted to the astonishing pillars Rising from Göbekli Tepe, he kept returning to Gürcütepe, drawn by a puzzle that was quieter but no less profound. The layers at Gürcütepe ran deep, sometimes as much as 6 meters beneath the surface. Each band of earth was a chapter in the settlement's long story. The lower levels belonged to the late pre-pottery Neolithic, the same era as Göbekli Tepe. Above that, pottery fragments appeared, marking the arrival of new technologies and new ways of living. Still higher, Schmidt's team uncovered the scars of later intrusions, Hellenistic coins, Roman walls, the footprints of centuries that had come and gone since the first farmers settled here. It was not a single moment frozen in time, but a living place that had changed, adapted, and endured across millennia. Stone foundations revealed the outlines of rectangular houses, their thick walls built to last against the heat and winds of the plain. Blackened hearths and layers of ash showed where fires had burned, warming families through cold Anatolian nights. Scattered across the floors were the everyday tools of survival: flint blades, knapping debris, and broken grinding stones. Here, there were no incredible animal carvings or towering T-shaped pillars, only the residue of thousands of meals, memories, births, and burials. This was a place of continuity, not spectacle, a community, not a shrine. Yet Schmidt, for all his reverence for the monumental, did not dismiss what he found. He recorded every foundation, every hearth, every flake of stone. He studied the thickness of the floors and the shapes of the rooms, searching for clues. Privately, he began to ask the question that would haunt the rest of his career. How did this modest, living settlement connect to the most significant temple of prehistory, standing so close and yet so different on the ridge above? What did it mean that ordinary houses and holy monuments had grown up side by side, and could one have existed without the other? In the silence of his trenches at Gürcütepe, Schmidt listened for an answer, aware that this unremarkable mound may one day tell the world's oldest story in a new and unexpected way: the domestic puzzle. As the years of excavation at Gürcütepe unfolded, what emerged from the soil was not a city of gods, but a tapestry of ordinary lives. The landscape was scattered with hearths, each one a silent witness to generations who gathered around firelight, preparing food, sharing warmth against winter's chill, and weaving stories into the smoke that curled up toward the sky. Scattered through the dirt were the remnants of daily work: flint flakes discarded from the making of blades and scrapers, a silent chorus of chipped stone that marked the rhythm of labor. Among the utilitarian debris, a different kind of artifact surfaced. Figurines, modeled in clay, stone, and bone, appeared in clusters. Some took on the ambiguous shapes of humanity, neither entirely male nor female, as if to capture the essence of life itself. Yet others were unmistakably robust, heavy-bodied female forms with pronounced hips and breasts. These figures, carved and molded by careful hands, bore the ancient weight of symbolism, fertility, abundance, and the mysterious cycles of the earth itself. The story of Gürcütepe deepened with the presence of grinding stones, pestles, and mortars, each one smoothed by the countless hands that had processed grain and seeds, transforming wild harvests into nourishment. Beads and bracelets, some meticulously shaped from bone, others from soft stone, suggested moments of adornment and identity, acts of beauty amid necessity. All these objects spoke not of a people consumed by the building of temples, but of a community whose days were filled with the ordinary miracles of survival and creativity. For Klaus Schmidt, the contrast was unavoidable. Göbekli Tepe just over the horizon, rose from the limestone as a cathedral of the unseen, its massive pillars an invocation of something greater than human life, whether it be the gods, the ancestors, or the unknown. But Gürcütepe Tepe was different. Here, in the low mounds and patchwork fields, the narrative was quieter, woven from the fabric of daily existence. The stones, bones, and clay did not shout, but whispered of meals prepared and eaten, of tools crafted and worn smooth, of small ceremonies performed in the heart of the home. It was as if humanity's most famous temple had a reflection in the everyday life. This shadow settlement carried the pulse of the ordinary, the other side of the Neolithic revolution. Here, the ceremony was not abandoned, but infused into the routines of life, the making of bread, the crafting of ornaments, the telling of stories as the sun dipped below the horizon. An uneasy question. By the early 2000s, the implications of Gürcütepe's discoveries began to trouble Schmidt's mind. The puzzle grew more tangled with each artifact pulled from the ground. Were the people who lived here the same as those who raised the T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe? Was Gürcütepe their home, a domestic heart supporting a sacred mountain? Or had these mounds only risen after the last of the monuments had been buried, built by descendants who remembered but no longer practiced the old rites? The clues were subtle but persistent. Early pottery shards began to appear, thin and often undecorated, marking a technological leap that had not been present in the earliest phases at Göbekli Tepe. Groundstone tools, expertly shaped and more varied than those found at the temple site, suggested new skills and shifting needs. The figurines, especially the abundant female forms, pointed to changing beliefs, symbolizing continuity and renewal rather than the awe-inspiring power of deities carved in stone. All of this unsettled Schmidt. The evidence hinted at a timeline that blurred the lines scholars once drew so confidently. Perhaps, he considered, Göbekli Tepe had not inaugurated a new age, but marked the closing of one. Possibly its story was not the genesis, but the final chord of an era defined by collective monumentality and ritual. If that were true, then Gürcütepe was the beginning of something else. A society learning to live in new ways, negotiating the unfamiliar balance between memory and change. It was a notion that threatened to upend comfortable theories. The idea that after the great stones of Göbekli Tepe had been raised and their rituals had faded, life at Gürcütepe carried on, changed, yet deeply connected to what had come before, was a vision few were ready to accept. To voice it was risky. Schmidt knew this. He confided his suspicions only in fragments, careful not to provoke controversy before the evidence was indisputable. But in the privacy of his field notes, he left no doubt. He wrote with conviction that Gürcütepe was the missing piece, not a footnote to Göbekli Tepe's grandeur, but a chapter of equal consequence. It preserved the afterlife of a revolution, illuminating the ways in which people reimagined themselves and their world once the age of monuments had passed. Return to the mound. After the death of Klaus Schmidt in 2014, the torch he carried passed quietly but persistently to a new generation of archaeologists. For several years, the mounds of Gürcütepe rested undisturbed beneath their thin crust of farmland and scattered debris, their secrets hidden just inches below the plow. Yet the questions Schmidt left behind would not be buried for long. In 2021 and 2022, a new excavation team returned to Gürcütepe with fresh methods, careful patience, and a determination to answer what Schmidt had only begun to ask. Their focus settled on Gürcütepe 3, a low rise that had so far escaped the relentless advance of roads, houses, and modern construction. They marked off a grid 30 by 30 feet, a neat square imposed upon the chaos of millennia. The work was methodical. Inch by inch, soil was brushed away to expose what time had tried to erase. Beneath the shallow agricultural topsoil, the old world revealed itself. The outlines of rectangular houses, dense clusters of workshops, layers of debris left by families who had lived and worked and dreamed here long after Göbekli Tepe's last ceremonies had faded into silence. For Schmidt, it was validation, though he never lived to see it. The settlement patterns matched the hints he had glimpsed in fragmentary finds and scattered features, evidence that Gürcütepe's story was not a footnote, but a chapter in its own right. What emerged was a vivid tableau of daily life in the late pre-pottery Neolithic B and into the pre-pottery Neolithic C, a period after the construction of the monumental T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe. The finds were modest, but telling: beads carved from stone and bone, bracelets shaped by hand, fragments of stone vessels, flint arrowheads, obsidian blades, and workshops where raw materials were shaped into tools of survival. Figurines, some human, some animal, some enigmatic, were tucked into the debris, their forms a whisper of beliefs still cherished. These discoveries were the answer to Schmidt's long-standing suspicion. Gürcütepe was not the cradle of monumentality. It was what came after. This was not a place where giant stones were raised to the sky in the name of gods or ancestors. Here, life allegedly unfolded in the aftermath, a sequel to the Age of Pillars, a living world sustained in the shadow of abandoned greatness. The people of Gürcütepe were not the architects of Göbekli Tepe's glory, but its inheritors, survivors in a world irrevocably changed by what had come before. In the controlled dig, each artifact and layer revealed a subtle shift in human priorities. The focus turned inward, from the grandeur of the communal temple to the intimacy of household space. Gürcütepe's legacy was not stone, but survival, the ingenuity of adaptation, the quiet endurance of ordinary people making a new world on the fertile plains, the forgotten years of humanity. For decades, archaeologists have debated and pondered the riddle of abandonment. Why did the people of southeastern Anatolia walk away from the colossal enclosures, the massive T-pillars of Göbekli Tepe, the site that would later astound the world? Droughts and climate swings, resource depletion, shifting game trails, the rise and fall of early cults, each theory was plausible, yet none were fully satisfying. At Gürcütepe, however, the traces left behind reframed the question. This was not a tale of collapse, but of transformation. In the layers of Gürcütepe, a pattern emerged. After the last feasts beneath the massive stones, the people did not vanish. They moved down from the rocky uplands into the shelter and promise of the plains. What had been collective labor under an open sky became a tapestry of smaller lives, lived in houses clustered close together. The power of the symbol was not discarded, but diffused. The grand animal carvings and monumental stones gave way to small figurines, fertility icons, amulets, and mysterious tokens. All of the objects carried meaning into private domestic space. The hearth replaced the enclosure. The rhythms of ritual continued, but in forms that blended seamlessly with the needs and routines of survival.